Whatever you think you know about Walmart is wrong. The executives at Walmart want the public to believe that the reason they are no longer open 24 hours is simply because of COVID. They want us to ignore the falling stock prices and stagnating growth that predate COVID. They do not want the public finding out about the methods by which they are attempting to remain profitable. Unfortunately, I am one of the few who know their secret. Without giving away any identifiable information, I want to attempt to share with you the story of how I do know. I worked at Walmart for a little over 6 months. As a college student, I found the job to be very convenient as it was not too difficult and management didn't mind working around my classes. I worked the meat there, which meant I spent most of my time in the backroom freezers unboxing, labeling, and stocking meat. Considering the fact that I am an introvert, this lonely-sounding job was something that I preferred to other more customer service-oriented jobs that I've had in the past. Most of the time, my shifts lasted from around 3 to 10 p.m. That shift, though sometimes busy, was nice because we had a very consistent set of workers. The same thing couldn't be said about the night shift. I didn't know why it was the case, but our night shift was notorious for running through different workers each week. I had always found this to be strange considering Walmart was not even open past 11 p.m. anymore due to COVID. This meant that during the night shift, there was no customer interaction and no one to work around. So in theory, the job should have been easier. On top of this, their pay was better than ours, this being a common source of gossip among the workers of other shifts, including mine. Nevertheless, managers would constantly ask for workers from the other shifts to try out the night shift, but considering the vast majority of workers who worked during the day or afternoon shifts were also college students, the request was usually untenable. That was until, of course, the semester was over and summertime commenced. That's where I found myself. You see, a few months prior, I had made a deal with my manager which entailed me switching to the night shift for the month of June to allow new workers to be trained on my shift before being moved to the night shift. Though I wasn't excited for the odd schedule, I was excited for the temporary raise and for the chance to get to work with no customer interaction. So as the day of my first night shift came around, I got ready and pulled into the Walmart parking lot 15 minutes before my shift was due to start. That night, I would be working 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., a shorter shift than usual, but seeing as it was my first night, I didn't mind this too much. Upon entering, the scene looked as normal as usual. There were scattered customers still shopping as we were open for another hour at this point, and my normal manager was even still there. After prepping me on what I would be doing, he told me to run to the break room to meet up with my night shift team lead so that he too could give me the rundown on the things that he wanted me to do. When I entered the break room, I got my first real look at some of the night shift crew. I was admittedly taken aback by the crew. Not only was I undoubtedly the youngest there, but the workers also all had this unmistakable air of lifelessness. I tried to brush off the uncomfortable feeling I got entering the room and made my way towards the man who looked to be about 30 years old. He was holding a clipboard and dressed in the typical managerial clothing with an identifiable badge. Though he looked stern and slightly stressed out, I was surprised by the air of excitement that he let out as he greeted me. "Michael, nice to see you, son. I hear you're going to be working with us for a little while," he said, giving me a pat on the shoulder. Yeah, about a month. Justin told me to check in with you about what to do," I replied, before he confirmed that I did the right thing and began to inform me on what to do. Once he finished explaining, I looked a bit confused as the total time I expected the combined task given by both managers to take me couldn't be more than an hour. "Yeah, we're a bit slow around here. I think the job is better at night. Despite what you may have heard about us, we tend to keep our associates around for longer than most know," he said boisterously, seeming to catch on to my confusion. After finishing up the conversation with him, I began to make my way towards my freezers with one statement he made still lingering in my mind. What did he mean they tended to keep their associates longer than most know? I hadn't seen a night shift worker last for more than 2 or 3 days, and on top of that, I never caught sight of them in the store after. I had the feeling the job must be worse than he let on. I remember brushing my unsure feelings aside and walking into the meat room to see a large man turned away from me occupying the label-making station. It turned out that I wasn't the only person who worked meat. This made the job even worse for me, as during the day shift there was only one worker. I couldn't imagine how the least busy shift needed double the amount of workers. After attempting to say hello to the man, he just ignored me. Feeling uncomfortable, I made my way towards the freezer which held our meat that was due to be stocked the next day. After putting on the freezer coat, I got to work on sorting and capping the bins for the next day's workers. That was when I noticed that the afternoon shift, my usual shift, hadn't requested enough meat for the next day. In fact, there wasn't a single piece of ground beef in the bin. Feeling frustrated, I made my way into the meat room to ask the man who still wouldn't look at me whether or not the truck which had brought our meat had come. No response. I slammed the printer down, already done with this shift, and made my way to the team lead, who I finally saw standing over by the produce, talking to a man who couldn't be any less than 7 feet tall. It was at this point that I thought I began to realize why no one lasted here. It was as though the workers during this shift were barely human. Looking around, I not only noticed abnormal people such as super tall or very short people, but the mannerisms of these workers were like none I had ever seen. None of the workers seemed to talk or greet each other, and instead, the few of them present were all robotically focused on their task at hand. I felt awful for thinking these things, as I knew they were just normal people, but I couldn't help but feel like everyone here had died long ago. Not literally, of course, but rather that something inside of them had died. Trying to brush off the eerie feeling that consumed me, I waited for my team lead to finish his conversation before asking about the ground beef. "Oh, of course. I will make sure to have John." You've met John, right? After I didn't respond for a second, he continued. "It's the man who you're sharing your department with tonight. Anyways, I will make sure John shows you where the ground beef is," he said, before walking off towards the meat department. Needing a break, I decided to go to the bathroom to clear my head for a second. This is when I remember seeing the first horrible thing of the night. As I entered the bathroom, I remember seeing a man with his back turned washing his hands. I didn't think much of it, but I instinctively looked in the mirror, just catching a glimpse of the man's face. Where there should have been lips and a tongue, there was a hole. It looked as though the bottom half of his face had been removed. There was no blood. Whatever had happened must have happened a while ago. I stumbled against the door before leaving the bathroom. In an attempt to rationalize the situation, I figured he must have been in some horrible accident, and I then felt pity as I realized that if the man had saw me, it most likely reminded him of his horrible accident and his subsequent disfiguration. Feeling stupid, I wanted to go back and apologize, but I knew that I wouldn't be able to suppress a reaction if I saw him again, so I simply continued my way back towards the meat room. Aside from the occasional worker, the store was completely empty by now. The thing that was strange to me was the fact that the meat had 2 workers, but there couldn't have been more than 15 other workers in the entire store. A store that during the day took a combination of hundreds of workers. Nevertheless, all of the workers present were nose deep into the shelves stocking their various items. Upon making my way back to the meat room, my team lead informed me that John had already taken an early 15-minute break, and he suggested that I do so as well, so that when I'm back, he can lead me to the freezer where I could gather what I needed. Feeling a bit annoyed that I had to waste my first 15 minutes barely an hour into my shift, I made my way towards the break room before deciding that I couldn't spend my break in there. I instead made my way towards the front exit and sat outside. Around 8 minutes passed before the door next to me opens, admittedly causing me to jump. Out comes a worker, the first worker that I've seen that looks around my age and relatively normal. I felt a sense of relief for some odd reason as the girl walked up to me and introduced herself as Shelby. She told me about how she had just started 3 days ago and about all the strange things that she too had experienced. Apparently, she worked alone for the most part, aside from the occasional visit from Tom, my team lead, who I was surprised to hear was the only manager for this shift. "Have you ever talked to anyone else here?" I asked after a couple minutes. "No, I saw you come in today, and aside from Tom, you're the only other person I've ever heard speak here." She went on to say that most of the people here are older, and that she assumed they just aren't interested in making friends. After agreeing to take our breaks together from now on to remain sane, we both made our way inside. "Shelby, there you are. If you don't mind, would you follow me, darling? I have something for you." "Oh, and Michael, John is ready for you," Tom yelled as he took notice of both of us. A bit saddened that I wouldn't have another real conversation with anyone for hours, I made my way towards the meat room. John was there, and this time he was facing me. His face was lined and looked worn. "Come on," he said in a deep voice. I tried to strike up a conversation as I was surprised to hear him talk. Again, no response. Feeling annoyed again, I followed him quietly as he led me down a hallway and into the deli towards what looked like their freezer door. "Everything you need is in the first bin on the left. Do not go anywhere else," he said before walking off. I grabbed the nearby cart, opened the door, and sure enough, to the left there was a bin with ground beef. Looking around inside the freezer, there wasn't much to see. Meat and other frozen goods lined the wall. That was until I noticed another door. There was a curtain of plastic covering it to, I assume, regulate temperature. I assumed that was the place he had in mind when he told me not to go anywhere. As I stacked the ground beef necessary for the next day, I couldn't help but wonder what could be in that room. I mean, if the meat isn't here, and we have entire freezers for ice cream and frozen dinners, I couldn't imagine what else needed to be frozen, especially in its own freezer. After I finished with the table of meat, I decided I couldn't hold my curiosity back. I walked out of the freezer and peered into the hallway and looked around to make sure no one was around. When the coast was clear, I made my way towards the door. After moving the plastic curtains and opening the door, I was immediately hit with an awful stench. I made my way forward into the room, which was at least 10 degrees cooler than the freezer I had been in previously. It was a seemingly unnecessarily large freezer, with a divider of more plastic curtains in the middle. Along the side of the wall, there were jars with what appeared to be something suspended inside. As I picked up the jar to examine its contents, I froze with terror. Inside the jar was what appeared to be human tongues preserved in some clear liquid. I dropped the jar, breaking the glass along the floor, and began to stumble backwards. After losing my balance, I fell into the curtains, hitting my head on something that was hanging from the ceiling. I looked around to see bodies on hooks hanging from the ceiling. The bodies were missing pieces that had been cut off. There were at least a dozen. Then I saw someone in the corner of the room. There was a small man operating a machine. It looked as though he was taking pieces of defrosted meat from tubs of water and pushing them through a meat grinder. As soon as I saw him, he saw me. I saw him pull his radio towards his chest as he began to call for help. I ran as fast as I could out of the freezer and onto the shopping floor. I called for help, but none of the workers seemed to hear. I rushed towards a man who was stocking the seasonal items, grabbed him, and turned him towards me, trying to get his attention. The man was completely mutilated. His eyes had been removed and poorly stitched closed. His right ear was missing completely as a bandage covered the wound. I screamed and ran as fast as I could. Then I saw him. Tom was running towards the meat room with a gun in hand. I was going to die. I couldn't think. I couldn't scream for fear of getting caught, so I just ran. I couldn't go through the exit by produce as it was locked. I had to get over to the other side. I heard Tom's yells of anger as he demanded everyone look for me. I was almost out. 20 feet away from me was the exit. Now 10. And I made it out of the front exit. I wasn't going to stop running, but then I saw her. Standing off to the side of the exit was Shelby, who was facing away from me. I had to save her. I yelled for her to run and that they were going to kill us. She didn't budge. I ran towards her, and as I gained vision of her front side, I saw the fresh stitches covering her now removed eyes. I saw streams of blood running from her ears, and I realized it was too late. I had to run. I felt waves of remorse, sadness, and anger as I ran away. Upon entering my car, I was hit again with another reality check as I heard the front doors open and the sound of gunshots ringing in the air. I stepped on the gas and drove. I drove until I couldn't drive anymore. I couldn't believe what I saw. I didn't want to believe it. I thought for days that I must be going crazy. I've never been back to that Walmart or any other one for that matter. After the incident, I called the police, but I was never given any more information on what happened. After Googling Tom, Justin, and Shelby, as well as the Walmart in question, I cannot seem to find anything on this matter. At this point, I don't even know if I want any more details on that night. What I do know is that particular Walmart shut down just 2 weeks later for what were reported as unrelated issues, something to do with declining sales. If there's one thing I can tell you, it's to trust your gut. If things seem off, do not try to rationalize your own fears. That's what I did, and that's what Shelby did. I got lucky. She didn't. Trust your gut.